Thank you. And I'd like to start with thanking everyone for your patience. Last week turned out to be a very messy one, but that's okay. We're resuming where we left off after the first meeting. And if it's all right, given our constrained time, TJ, could we ask you for the updates that you were mentioning?
Sure. So really it is based on kind of well, first of all, I apologize for kind of not being able to move this forward while you were gone, Michelle. Yeah, but the first, so in the department's pacing proposal, which is what we were kind of basing the framework of our actions on to start, one of the first steps was just taking the emissions, finding a GWSA emissions trajectory, and going from where, like point A to where we need to be in 2030. And so those are kind of numbers that we have and are that exist. We know generally what the target is for 2030 for emissions reductions as a whole. And then the Climate Council has recommended proportional reductions by sector using 2018 as a baseline. So we know what the target is for the RCI sector, so the thermal sector. So we have the target, and then based on the GHG inventory, we have what where we've been and where we are now. And so Brian has provided some data in a spreadsheet template. He just provided it to me today. We talked last week, and I think both of us lost track of that again. So he provided me some information, could provide more, but let me just pull it up really quick. Oh, I don't know if I can share my screen. Looks like I can.
I think so. And just quick, could I interrupt you for a moment, TJ? We have had one other person on the phone join us, so just to ask that person to identify him or herself.
Actually, one doesn't have to if one isn't speaking, but this is Thomas Weiss in Montpelier.
Appreciate that, Thomas. And understand not necessary, but appreciate it.
And while we've taken a quick break, I know I've read the pacing proposal. I'm just trying to find it quickly, but if anybody happens to have it open and could quickly send it along, I just need to save it in a folder for easy reference, since we're obviously going to be working off of that.
When you're asking the pacing, you're asking for the department's
it was
proposal.
like the department's filed proposal on required amounts, right? Is that what you're talking about, TJ?
Yeah. Yep.
And while we're doing the backup, TJ, and you're pulling that up, I made a note here about the numbers we have for the trajectory for 2030. So if we could keep that in mind for explaining to us what those numbers are and what we have already.
Right.
So part of what we were figuring out.
Right. So that's what I'm looking for. So can you see? It's usually I can see like a box around it. I can't tell what I'm sharing right now. So hopefully
you're sharing a sheet that says sector emissions in million metric tons. So I think it's the right.
Yeah, that's the right one. Thank you. So this is basically we need to come up with a trajectory that. Now, this one is based on 2029, calendar year 2029, to meet the January 1st, 2030 target. And I actually am not sure. I think there's different ways to read that target, but whether we're looking at calendar year 2030 emissions or calendar year 2029 emissions. So I just want to put that out there. But right now, the spreadsheet shows we're really talking about calendar year 2029 to meet that GWSA target, because it says meet it by January 1st. And So on that assumption, that what you see there is the proportional reduction based on the Climate Council in that column O for 2029 and what is needed to be reached by that year. I think the 2024 is what we're estimated to be at. So we have actual data through 2020. 2021 will be done in about a month by ANR, and then they do project 2022, 2023, and 2024, and so that would be the projection for 2024. Oh, I'm sorry. That is the requirement for 2024 in a proportional reduction is way off. Let me say that again. That's the GWSA requirement saying we need to meet it by January 1st, 2025. So it's calendar 2024 year projection reductions needed. And then the 2018 to 2020 is actual info. And we could go backwards if we wanted to. I think, I think we need just to figure out a starting point for emissions going forward to base off of to create a trajectory, and then the end point is that column O. We could even make the start point the column J here, the 2024, since we have to meet that. You know, that kind of is a even though we don't know if we've met it or not.
Sorry, when you say you need to meet 2024, is that's not in the clean heat standard, that's in the global warming act.
Correct.
So yeah, that's obviously not something we can control.
Exactly. That answers my question too.
So I don't know, you know, maybe I can send this around to you all, and, you know, keeping in mind it's kind of, well, it is what it is. It's just some numbers in a spreadsheet. And then over the next couple of weeks, we can go back and forth and see what kind of trajectory we want. I don't know, you know, we'll decide if we meet in between or not. But
sorry, I'm still getting myself caught up here. TJ, is 2024 it's projected, right? Since it's not over.
Sorry, I said the wrong thing first, and then I corrected myself. So 2024 on here is the proportional reduction. That's required by GWSA. So that's just
so it's a target, not an actual.
Correct.
These are all targets, not actual. Okay, thank you.
The shaded are targets, and then the non-shaded on the left side are actuals.
Mm-hmm.
And I just have a quick question. I don't know if you talked about this with Brian or not, is if ANR is not going to know if the 2030 goals were not met until, seems like there's about a 3-year lag in the inventory. So it'll be based on 2029, you know, emissions numbers based on the January 1st threshold. But if they won't know until 3 years later. And so, I mean, I guess 2025 comes first. CHS isn't tied to 2025, but I guess.
Yeah, officially they won't know, but they have a reasonable amount of certainty for I think right now they'd have reasonable amount of certainty for 21 and 22, and then in another month, maybe even 2023, because they get tax data and other data that gives them, you know, they definitely will know the electricity emissions. That's a small part. They know the transportation from data from DMV. You know, so they have those numbers for 21 and 22, I believe. The ag is a lot harder, and some of the other ones are harder, and so they don't know the exact amount. So, but officially they won't know for 3 years. So yeah, I think the job is for us to draw a line on this, the first step. And I don't know that we need to spend too much time of it. This is probably one of the least important steps of all of this. Because we'll need to draw it helps. It's important, but it helps in the translation, the going from these targets to what the clean heat credit values will be baseline and what that trajectory for obligated parties is. So shouldn't have said least important, but least, I think we could just start with a linear trajectory and decide how to start, whether we start from the average of 2018 to 2020 and go from there, or something else. Just draw a linear path to 2029. But
Yeah, so that's a question that relates to just like what's going to be the pace of market transition, and that to me also it raises questions for me about early action credits, and are some of these going to be banked such that it's going to be like a lot easier to achieve year one reductions because we're actually like getting several years of credit in one, or I don't know. I mean, at the same time, maybe we don't need to worry about that, and we just go with like a straight linear trajectory and kind of call it a day, because it's just for the purpose of assigning credits, right? So if the actual credits exceed that, there's not how big of a problem is it if we're off with this?
So early action credits, I don't think really. I think they're kind of useless in terms of the setting of the obligations, because we have to just hit these emissions targets. These are just emissions targets, right? And we just have to hit them. And so if we find there's tons of early action credits, then we just have to increase the obligation for entities. All the early action credits do are like give people who want to take action now a chance to like go and get ahead of the game. And so it's going to create winners or losers. If you made these investments to go forward, then you're going to be in a better position once the law is enacted. The law doesn't get enacted, you may have made investments that if the law doesn't come to fruition in the next session for whatever reason, then you may have made investments that don't count for anything. But either way, you've gotten those emissions reductions. So I think that's the point of the early action credits. But as it relates to the emissions setting the obligation, we just have to say, well, here's the obligation and we have 1 million early action credits. We have to up the obligation by this much because we just need to hit the emissions targets.
But wouldn't the early action credits count towards the emission targets?
Well, yeah, that's why, but they don't actually reduce emissions from like past there.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, it depends if they've already been factored into the past inventory or not, which yeah.
Yeah.
Can we also just can you just walk me through like what happens if we're off? Like if we set the trajectory, the target in 2027 at 2 million metric tons from this sector, and they're actually 1.5 or they're actually 2.5. I mean, we won't know that for a couple of years, like we just discussed, but it's just that there's not like an immediate repercussion to the credit owners or the trading system, is there? It's more just like we either are overperforming or underperforming relative to our targets, and we might be off.
Yeah, I think we might be off, and it may change the price of the value of a credit on if we set a target and set obligations to the point where we think we're, from some early data, people think we're overperforming, then then that in the marketplace, people say, "Oh, I don't need to buy credits." The demand for more credits goes down, and they don't. Activities slow down, and vice versa.
So like,
We
sorry, I'm just trying to, I'm not, I find this policy so confusing. I'm like trying to walk myself through it like I'm a child. But so like if we say that there only needs to be, the total emissions allowed are 1.5, and actually we needed to it we could have accepted 2, but then the credit values would be higher. And if we made it too high, then I'm just trying to understand that, like, which direction things go. Maybe I don't need to worry about this yet, but
Yeah, so I'm not sure, I guess is the real answer, but I think if we set a trajectory, that is going to then translate eventually into the amount of credits each obligated entity needs to get. And if we, I guess it just depends on performance in the marketplace and like what happens. That they will, and if we're actually off in that translation, say we set the target at 2, and we calculate the number of clean heat credits that each entity needs, but we do that based on assuming that nobody uses biofuels to get credits, and then all of a sudden everybody decides to use biofuels to get credits, then that's going to change the I think that could change the trajectory.
I think this is useful discussion, but to take your point, Emily, I think some of this will come later because it's my understanding that at this point we are using some of this information that Brian has provided, and the other information we're going to learn about what the other breakout groups are doing, and other information that comes from the consultants on answering the question from the statute is, are the targets put in place for 2025 and 2030, are they practical, and how, with our proposal and breaking this all out, showing the commission how that would take place. So in coming up with this, we're coming up with a first pass model of how to meet the targets that are in the statute, using the information we have to make sure that things aren't double counted, to make sure we're consistent with what they're doing with the numbers that Brian provided. Does that match up with other people's understanding?
yeah.
Yeah.
So
I'm not sure we have a basis for doing anything other than a linear trajectory at this point.
Yeah, I think the only basis would be if we don't think that there is the workforce or the ability to do it in the first year. Like we got a linear trajectory and we said, oh, it's not realistic to hit whatever the 2025 target would be, and we want to go a little slower to start. But I don't think we would. I was trying to think about that question too, Emily, and I think you're right. I don't think that's going to be a strong enough basis to do it anything different than linear.
Just curious, since I wasn't in the last meeting, did Haley say anything on that regard of workforce basis in previous meetings, or we hadn't gotten there yet?
No, we hadn't gotten there.
Okay.
I have a quick question on that. So right now we have access to the latest inventory data, and I think there was obviously the potential study is going to be looking at workforce. Is that in September when we have the final? Is that something that's going to be easily translatable to make this curve not linear if it doesn't make sense to make it linear? Like, I just wonder how that should, if it should, and how it should affect the curve. for pacing, you know, based on that information?
So I think we'll have a draft of the workforce report soon, sometime in May. I don't know when that is. And we'll have the final even before then, before September 1st. But I don't think it will provide a quantitative basis to kind of change the trajectory. I think it'll be more qualitative, you know, be incumbent upon the tag to translate that to if we think there's any changes necessary from linear.
Sorry, was that the potential study you're referring to, TJ, or a different study?
So as part of the work that NV5 is doing, there's a report on workforce and what, you know, if workforce causes limitations in being able to meet the
What about
requirements.
the potential study itself?
That it will have kind of an optimized scenario, but will not, you know, we probably need to draw a line in the potential study too on what the interim targets are, but it will be a little bit optimized in terms of taking into account cost as well. So, so that will have its own line, I guess.
Yeah, I guess it seems like this is a topic. The trajectory issue is one that we should probably revisit once we have a little bit, like maybe that workforce report. And also, I would love to understand the interplay with credit ownership and value, because if, you know, if having a linear trajectory was going to mean that, like, based on where the market is and how much it's going to take to achieve it, it's going to make the credits like super expensive in year one while everybody gets everything set up. I don't know, that I could be swayed to do something different. Like, I don't want to create a price shock in year one. But I don't know that we have any basis we just don't have any information to base that on right now.
I would advocate, as noted in our comments, I might agree. I don't disagree or agree on the basis. I think that's a good point. But I would urge consideration to have flexibility on the PUC side to have that curve and ramp up. I think, as noted in our comments, it takes years in Efficiency Vermont's history to ramp up appropriate workforce capacity that's needed. It's not a quick thing. So I agree, and maybe just urge in the future on the PUC side for flexibility in terms of creating a ramp up or curve and adding that translation from that report.
Excellent point. And
Yeah.
go ahead, Deidre. I just want to remind people that we've got just over 5 minutes. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Happened quickly. No, I was just going to say, you know, reacting to Emily Levin's comment about like revisiting this, I think there's value to that, but also just refocusing this subgroup on like process, because I think to understand like expectations, like it's helpful to know the workforce like study from the potential study is probably not going to be quantitative, you know. So I think from the PUC's end, it's useful to set those expectations and really understand like what sources of information are going to go into, you know, the curve. If we have, like, I don't think last session we talked a little bit more about baseline year. Like that's not really that's going to be a subjective thing, like how we decide to what are we tying the 2030 goals to? You know, if this gets implemented in 2026, for example, are we using, so that would be, we would probably have access to like 2023 GHG inventory data. Are we weather normalizing 2023? Are we using an average of the last 3 years from the inventory that we have access to? So those are kind of the process questions that I think would be helpful to answer. At least in my view, certainly open to other perspectives there, but don't want to take up any more time. So sorry about that.
Well,
Well,
that relates to, since I guess our time has gone by quickly, we don't have a lot of time left. One of the bullets on our agenda was um, like reviewing our short-term tasks, I think it was, and especially having missed our near-term goals, especially having missed the first meeting. I would love to spend a couple of minutes just clarifying like what are our deliverables for the next, few meetings, like over the next month or two. What are we focused on doing? What should our priorities be? I think Deirdre made one recommendation that any assumptions we can document, such as, we recommend this baseline year, we recommend a default assumption of a linear trajectory, which we can revisit down the road pending future information. Like if we could just make sure we're actually documenting any decisions and assumptions along the way, that's one deliverable. And then I have a few others, but I think I'll pause there. Like, would that be useful to just clarify what we're actually supposed to be doing?
yes, and you bring up all the points. Can people see what I just shared from my screen? So these are actually the key items that came out of the first meeting that we had, and we've tackled or we've received the information from ANR. But we definitely, this isn't formal. These were just the notes as taken at the time. But I'm happy to share again what we put together to draft that and link them again to the straw proposal from the DPS. So TJ, quick question. Are there any changes to that other one that was originally filed where I excerpted things in April? Okay, so I had included those and I'll share that with everybody. Ideally, I think I can pull it together over the next couple of minutes. I'll send those over, but I did share them with Catherine. I'm not sure if they were posted anywhere. Let me stop sharing for a minute. I agree, Emily. The identifying what our next steps are, what our timeline is. From the revised pacing, the revised work plan from PUC, does that add any dates for us, Deirdre?
It doesn't. So the work plan is really without the kind of very specific dates that were more that were in the original December schedule. It just did not seem to work well, that schedule. But I would say, I mean, so DPS straw proposal that was answering the request for comment on the process for the pacing, I think is a good straw proposal to provide feedback for this group to say, like, that could be a deliverable to say, like, yes, this phase is fleshed out enough to be a recommendation for how the PUC should structure the rule around how they're pacing the 10-year requirements and the triennial update. And then, but in terms of dates, you asked me date. I mean, eventually we'll try and get better expectations on this, but I would say 1 or 2 more meetings on this. I would not suggest much more time than that, to try and really get to that deliverable stage where you can provide something concrete, something in writing, because again, like, this has to go back to the tag and for tag to the whole group to say, yeah, we are good with this recommendation, or so that's where I am.
So you mentioned specifically going through the DPS proposal and just noting, yes, we agree with this. Yes, we agree with this. Yes, we think this has enough information to go on. This one's going to take a little longer, but we agree with the approach. I had noted, like, I'm trying to take notes on what our deliverables or tasks would be. So I wrote document key assumptions. So we have reference year, emissions trajectory, and then something about the measure mix methodology, like the approach for incorporating the measure mix into the future emissions was on Michelle's list. I don't totally understand that one yet, but I look forward to digging into that in a future breakout meeting. Is there anything else, like any other key assumptions that are on people's lists? Or
think
like,
one of the
Yeah.
other things that was mentioned in the PUC request for comment is the process for considering good cause temporary adjustments of the annual requirements, and what types of information would be needed to justify, those adjustments. That would be another assumption that would be good to include.
okay. I had also identified a couple of, like, I was spending some time, as Deirdre knows, like reviewing the tasks and we're also trying to really clarify the overall tags assignments and deliverables, and line that up with what the consultants are doing and the PUC schedule. And that's a little bit of a work in progress still. But as I was looking at that, there were 3 things that came up for me that I just wanted to flag and get your thoughts on. One is, I know there's an issue of aligning the clean heat standard GHG reductions with the GHG inventory, the ANR inventory. Is that, and maybe that's not in near term, so some of these might not be as high a priority as the areas Deirdre just mentioned, but is that an issue that you think we should weigh in on? Just like, it seemed to me that there's a lot of discussion around that, and if we could document in writing, like, here's what we think, and or if that's already in the PSD proposal, that we could just say, do that.
Can
Are
you
you talking
restate
about-
your question, Emily? I'm sorry, I lost track.
Just this discrepancy with the life cycle emission, just the methods under the clean heat standard and the life cycle emissions tracking with the way that the state's greenhouse gas inventory is done, which is how we're going to measure progress. And things like, wood could be a clean heat measure, but it's like not in the inventory in the same way, and different boundaries. And like, are we the group that's supposed to make some recommendations around?
I think
kind of
that's going to overlap with some of the other breakout groups and something that we'll have to discuss within the full tag. We can certainly weigh in on the impacts from our perspective, but others, is that others' understanding as well? That's all overlapping with there's still a serious schism or tension about using GREET and how wood is accounted for, how biofuels are accounted for. So that's not going to be resolved within this group.
But I do think this group kind of takes the resolution of that in terms of what the life cycle credits are, right? Like each measure counts as this much, whatever, and then translates between GWSA required emissions reductions and the life cycle. And that's what that is in the pacing proposal, or I guess the comments that in how we use the measure mix to do that. And so it's kind of a long, but I think
it will factor
I do think
in.
that is part of this group's charge. Yeah,
It is
it'd be
part of
helpful.
it.
Yeah,
It is part of it, but it's not something for us to resolve independently. That's information that will be coming to us.
So I just popped
Well,
in to do like a 3-minute warning. You've got
Mhm.
2 minutes actually now left.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Catherine. Yeah, I think just to underscore what TJ said, I think we're not the group assigning the life cycle analysis methodology or credits or any of that, but the reconciliation between the two, like no matter where the life cycle
Absolutely.
stuff ends up, here's how we translate between the two. I do think we're probably the group to take the lead on recommending that. So I wanted to flag that as another area. And then just really quickly, the other ones that were kind of on the list that I wondered if this group should weigh in on were recommend strategies to avoid double counting of GHG emissions under the CHS, and recommend approach to determine how existing thermal sector programs and activities that contribute to thermal sector GHG reductions will be accounted for in the CHS and influence the total amount that obligated parties need to deliver. Are we are those issues we should be considering? And if not, like, who's working on those?
Deirdre, you could answer.
No. So I caught the first thing, the double counting and I'm sorry for
And
the
then the
background noise.
second
but-
one is related, I think, to double counting, but existing thermal sector programs that like there's already WAP, there's Efficiency Vermont, there's Tier 3, there's codes and standards, like there's a lot of other stuff going on that's delivering reductions in the RCI sector in Vermont beyond what is accomplished in the Clean Heat Standard, and how is that reconciled?
Yeah,
So
I
think-
see. Go
Oh,
ahead,
go
CJ.
ahead, Deirdre. I see that second one as credit ownership in that group, and the first one may also be in credit ownership in terms of double counting. I think those are both should be addressed there. But
Yeah, so
I
we
agree.
figure out the
And-
total amount to deliver, and then we let other people worry about, well, if 90% of this is already delivered through existing programs and there's only 10% remaining for the Clean Heat Standard, then that's great, and we just have really easily achievable credits. I don't know, I'm just
I think you're jumping even farther ahead, Emily, and that's great. That's great. I
I'm
don't
just
see
gonna
this.
like clarify what's in this group's purview to do. I'm not trying to solve that now, but
Yeah, no, for some
Well, I
reason I
think they're
think of
going
that
to
as,
be different stages too. Deirdre pointed out, we've got certain deliverables right away, and it may be that we need to reconvene as other information comes in from credit ownership, from the consultants to address more of what you're talking about.
yeah, I see the coordination with other thermal programs as potentially being a separate group or a separate topic. But that maybe, and this is my view, my limited understanding is for the double counting, for that to be very closely related to the reconciliation between LCA and inventory, because LCA, I guess, will include different sector emissions or different inventory sector emissions, and making sure that when we translate those life cycle emissions that are being earned as clean heat credits, that when we match those to the inventory, they're not messing with the inventory's emissions allotments, sorry. So anyway, I think of those things as very related.
can we agree to meet next week, and we'll like on an off